Hi, I'm going to talk about ANCA-associated vasculitis and the lung, a rational approach to these problems. The brief that has been given to me is that I should give an overview of how these diseases they present and how these should be managed. So it will be both for the physicians as well as for the specialist pulmonologists. So as we are all aware, ANCA-associated vasculitis come under the small vessel vasculitis group, and there are three prototypes: GPA, which was previously known as Wegener's granulomatosis; EGPA, which was previously known as Churg-Strauss syndrome; and MPA, which was previously known as was not there before the Chapel Hill nomenclature system came into being in 1994. So to differentiate between the three, all three can have lung and kidney involvement, and they can present with a renopulmonary syndrome kind of presentation. But what differentiates the three is that the upper airway involvement, like the sinus involvement, nasal obstruction, nasal crusting, which is very dominant feature of GPA, and some sinus involvement can be seen in EGPA also, but it's singularly absent in MPA. So GPA is characterized by, as I said, nasal obstruction, nasal crusting, nasal bleeding, and sinus disease, which is not there in MPA. And the other important thing which differentiates, and the thing which is there in EGPA is there is asthma and there is eosinophilia. So as the name suggests, eosinophilic granulomatosis with polyangiitis. So there can be tissue eosinophilia, there can be peripheral eosinophilia, and there is history of asthma which might precede the presentation of vasculitic multisystem involvement. And what is there in histopathology is that, as the name has granuloma in both these terms, the histopathology can show a granuloma along with vasculitis, whereas MPA, the granuloma is absent. So if you look at the extent of involvement, in GPA especially, from head to toe, almost all organs can be involved. And if you look at the eye involvement, there can be episcleritis. There can be very bad and necrotizing scleritis, which may result into scleromeresia perforans and even collapse of the globe. In the oral cavity, you have large chunky ulcerations both on the tongue or on the oral cavity. So these are different from EPTHI. I'm sorry, this is shifted, but if you see large bore of flesh taken away from either tongue or from the buccal cavity, then you are sure that this is not the garden variety of this thing, aphthous ulcer, but it could be a vasculitic ulcer. So the other thing which is very common, which is very unique with GPA, is strawberry gums. You can see the gums here like strawberry. When these are there, this is quite suggestive of an underlying granulomatosis with polyangiitis. As I said, the dominant manifestation in GPA is sinus disease. Over a period of time, there can be nasal septal perforation. As you can see here, there is a perforation in the nasal septum here. There is a collapse of the nasal bridge, and you can see the nasal inflammation on PET in one of these patients. As I already alluded to, there is the sinusitis is also a dominant manifestation, and this also many times gives us the opportunity to biopsy this area from where all the vasculitis can be demonstrated, although more than one biopsies might have to be taken to confirm the diagnosis. The other sinister involvement is subglottic stenosis, which can present with stridor. Many times it can occur even with the limited or localized disease in which you may not have lung or renal involvement, but this can have this is a life-threatening complication of GPA. The pulmonary involvement, the classical finding is cavitating nodules. There can be cavitating nodules with thick wall. There can be lung hemorrhage. Lung hemorrhage can occur in MPA also, but the lung nodules like the one that I showed do not occur in MPA. The capillaritis is what causes lung hemorrhage. On CT, generally there is a peripheral sparing. But rarely there might be unique presentations like this young lady who presented during pregnancy with cannonball opacities and was diagnosed to have GPA. There can be peripheral neuropathy or mononeuritis multiplex with all the three. There can be pseudotumor-like presentation, which is generally seen with GPA. There can be pachymeningitis. This was a lady who had lower cranial nerve palsies. As compared to this side, you can see there is a pachymeningitis due to Wegener's granulomatosis. She had lung or sinus involvement also. There can be various skin manifestations. These may be in the form of a nodule, cutaneous infarcts, or large pyoderma gangrenosum kind of lesion. One thing that I would wish to say is a leukocytoclastic vasculitis presenting as palpable purpura may be associated with systemic vasculitis, but standalone does not always mean systemic vasculitis. It might be because of infections or drugs also, but it can also be a spectrum of vasculitis. So these are the manifestations which will make you think of systemic vasculitis. When now we come to ANCA testing, previously it was recommended that both indirect immunofluorescence and ELISA assays should be done. The latest international consensus is that in a suspected case, PR3 or MPO immunoassay should be done, not IIF. And if it is negative, you do it with a different kit. And if it is still negative and you have a strong clinical suspicion, then an immunofluorescence in a lab, in an ideal standardized lab can be ordered. The important thing in managing these patients is that one has to differentiate the mimics, because if you give immunosuppression in a very important mimic like infective endocarditis, you can very well imagine what can be the outcome. So mimics have to be excluded, and especially infective endocarditis has to be excluded in these patients. Now coming on to treatment. The treatment in the initial stages, there is a stage of induction where the vasculitic activity is controlled, and this is followed by a phase of maintenance where we prevent the flares and try to rehabilitate, and then there is a long-term follow-up to monitor for flare or manage comorbidities. And whenever there is a relapse, these diseases are relapsing, more so PR3 positive disease where the relapses are more, and then one has to do the reinduction. If you look at the drugs which are used, generally cyclophosphamide or rituximab are the backbone of induction. MMF can only be used in milder version of MPO positive disease, and methotrexate practically is never used. It is used in conditions where very mild disease, sinus disease, no nasal bone involvement, skin involvement without any ulceration, and nodules without cavitation and all that. So practically most of these patients in our clinical experience we've seen would require either cyclophosphamide or rituximab. And the maintenance, rituximab has become the drug of choice for maintenance, although the dose is less, 500 milligrams. But azathioprine can also be used as a maintenance therapy. One can also use methotrexate and MMF. So for those of you who are interested in evidence, I'll take you through the journey of evolution of, this is the basics. But if you want to look at the evidence, I'll see how this evidence has evolved over a period of time. All of us are aware about Tony Fauci or Anthony Fauci. He was standing right behind Donald Trump during the COVID pandemic. He was the same person. He's the director of NIH. He and Sheldon Wolf, they published a paper in New England Journal of Medicine in 1971, after which cyclophosphamide, oral cyclophosphamide, became the drug of choice, and this universally fatal disease kind of became chronically manageable disease, and survivals did improve. But there were challenges of infertility, and there were also challenges of malignancy because of the very high total cumulative dose of cyclophosphamide. We all know that cyclophosphamide can cause hemorrhagic cystitis, and there is a risk of malignancies, especially if the total cumulative dose is more than 30 grams. Then in the maintenance phase, it was shown that azathioprine, I'm going to show all the trials. Yellow ones are the induction trials and green ones are the maintenance trials. The azathioprine, this was a David Jane study published in New England Journal of Medicine, which showed azathioprine in maintenance is as good as cyclophosphamide. So then azathioprine became a drug of choice for remission maintenance in ANCA vasculitis. And then there was a WEG trial, which showed that methotrexate is as good as azathioprine. So either methotrexate or azathioprine could be used after initial induction with cyclophosphamide. But oral cyclophosphamide, total cumulative dose was very, very high. So it was, whereas with the IV pulse cyclophosphamide, the dose is, cumulative dose is lower. And the Cyclops trial showed that IV pulse cyclophosphamide is as good as daily oral cyclophosphamide as far as remission induction is concerned. Although the relapses were shared more with IV pulse, but they were non-life-threatening relapses, I didn't really make any difference. So after this, although PGI we've been always using pulse cyclophosphamide, after this, most of the centers, previous to it, many centers were divided whether to use cyclo pulse or oral, but most of the centers switched to IV pulse cyclophosphamide. The game changer in induction was the back-to-back papers in New England Journal of Medicine, RAVE and rituximab trials, which established rituximab as a remission induction agent in ANCA-associated vasculitis. RAVE did not include patients with severe lung involvement, with lung hemorrhage requiring ventilation, and also the creatinine more than 4 patients were not included. Whereas rituximab trials had patients with advanced renal failure, and in this group, initial pulse cyclophosphamide was also combined with rituximab. But these two papers established rituximab as a drug which was non-inferior. Mind it, my word is non-inferior. No trial till now has really shown rituximab to be superior to cyclophosphamide, although their subgroup analysis have sometimes shown that rituximab might be better in a relapsing PR3 positive disease. Another trial which was published there was IMPROVE trial. Many of us are very fond of mycophenolate, but this showed that mycophenolate was inferior to azathioprine in remission maintenance. So you have to now see where you would wish to position mycophenolate, although there is another study which I'm going to talk about. Another game changer coming from Louis Guivan's group, from the French vasculitis group, was the Mendelsohn trial, which showed that in induction, the 2 doses of rituximab are used, which is 1 gram 2 weeks apart, total 2 pulses, or 375 milligram per meter square weekly for 4 pulses. And in the maintenance, what Louis Guivan's group showed that 500 milligrams every 6 months, the outcomes were better as compared to azathioprine. And the 5-year follow-up showed there was survival advantage also with rituximab. Then the effort, the Mendelsohn 2, where they tried to give scheduled 6-monthly rituximab in the extent phase, the next trial, or they gave rituximab only when either there was repopulation of B cells or there was doubling of the PR3 titers or ANCA becoming positive after having become negative. So it showed that both had similar, almost similar outcomes, but the problem was, and there were fewer infusions in the tailor down. But the important thing was that the very premise on which this was tailored, in those even patients where the B cell repopulation was not there, even there the relapses were occurring, and even in patients where the PR3 was not increasing. So the reason given was that B cell repopulation might have been occurring at the disease site and not peripherally. And CD19 is not really a very good marker of re-emergence of memory B cells, but to CD27 is. So all these things made believe that and we also looked at this data critically. We looked at that while calculating the sample size, an arbitrary figure of 35% relapse rate was taken, whereas in the main Mendelsohn trial, the major and minor relapses were only 5 to 11%. And although at this moment not statistically significant, if these patients were followed up for a long period of time, this might have become significant. So Louis Guivan's group, they accepted our point, and they said that the sample size, this was a very exciting study, but the Mendelsohn the sample size calculation for Mendelsohn 2 was done when the Mendelsohn main studies results were not available. So they accepted that this study was in fact underpowered to detect an absolute relapse rate of 7%. And these changes might have become significant if there was a longer follow-up of these patients. Now, another study which looked at mycophenolate mofetil in remission induction in ANCA vasculitis showed, if you look at the main paper, it looked as if the time to primary remission and time to relapse, there was no statistical difference as far as data was provided. But if you look at the supplementary, there were more relapses in the PR3 ANCA positive patients. and also relapse-free survival was shorter in MMF group. So you can position it in only milder disease and non-PR3 MPO positive ANCA vasculitis. Another study, which is a very big study done at multiple centers over many years, was the PEXIVA study, which looked at role of plasma exchange and two different low dose, the rapid taper of the standard taper of glucocorticoids. And you can see that plasma exchange, with or without plasma exchange, there was no benefit. So plasma exchange didn't show any benefit as far as death or ESRD was concerned in these patients. Similarly, reduced dose or standard dose taper, there was no difference in the death or end stage renal disease. So probably plasma exchange was in its way out of the management, although many people, some people contested that there were not many patients with severe DH requiring ventilator in both the arms, and also stratifying the patients based upon kidney biopsy. But these are very, very difficult situations to bring into the trial setting. So I think for those, maybe jury may be still out, but by and large, in most of the other situations, Plex is out of picture as of now. Another exciting study, which was published last week, was avacopan in ANCA-associated vasculitis. This is C5a inhibitor. This was basically trying to see whether it can position itself instead of steroids. Very exciting study. In one group, they had avacopan, and in another group, they had steroids. So, and the induction drugs were either rituximab or cyclophosphamide. And the exciting news is that at 26 weeks, the avacopan met non-inferiority design, but at week 52, it met the superiority criteria, both and also for a GTI cumulative worsening score and GTI aggregate improvement score. So this is extremely, extremely exciting news. And this might pave the way for steroid-free regimes along with the rituximab or cyclophosphamide in the management of ANCA-associated vasculitis. Another exciting study published last year from the French group was the MENETSEN-3 trial, in which those who were, I discussed MENETSEN-2, and those patients who at month 28 were in remission were re-randomized to see. This was basically to see how many doses of rituximab are really required to continue the patients in remission. So one group was continued on rituximab every 6 months, and the other group placebo infusions were given. And as you can see, both relapse-free survivor and major relapse-free survivor was better in the patients who were given scheduled rituximab every 6 months. So looking at this and other data, we wrote that 10% of the initial 157, they relapsed within the first 28 months. And out of the remaining, in this trial, 4% in rituximab arm and 26% in the placebo arm, they relapsed. And looking at both these data, plus 60-month data of MENETSEN, tells us that prolonged maintenance therapy, if not lifelong, is required. And drug-free remission seems to be a distant reality. And in fact, Louis Guillain's group, again, they also concurred that ANCA vasculitis can be managed as a chronic disease and warrant long-term maintenance therapy with rituximab for more than or equal to 4 years. So many people say that maintenance is only for 2 years. So it is at least 2 years. Nobody really knows for how long we really have to treat. For those who've been treating large cohorts, they know that they have to be given for very, very long time. And we've seen relapses coming even when you stop treatment after 5 years or 10 years. So if you look at the Gary Hoffman, he also had quoted in 2014 that I'll treat these patients indefinitely unless the therapy is not tolerated or there are contraindications to therapy. So you will have to keep this in mind. Towards the end, rituximab, MENETSEN trials were where, this was a rituximab trial, which rituximab was used in maintenance after having been used as induction. And the dose were also different. In these, the dose of rituximab was the maintenance dose, once the maintenance was started after 4 months, not after 6 months. And unlike MENETSEN main trial, the maintenance dose was also 1 gram every 4th monthly and not 500 milligrams every 6 monthly. And they also used standards 1 milligram versus 0.5 milligram in maintenance. The induction phase was published recently. It showed that at 4 months, most of the patients went into remission. And the maintenance trial was data was presented at the nephrology meetings, and it showed that rituximab is superior to azathioprine even in this cohort. The relapses were definitely lesser in rituximab. There were no major adverse events in these patients. The other important thing from developing world perspective is whether we can use biosimilar, and this is what we published. In our cohort in 77 patients, and compared it with all the published cohorts, both in remission induction phase and remission maintenance phase. I don't have time to go into details, but this did well. You can look up at this paper, and there were not major alarming signs. There were some infections, but they are reported in all the trials. So I would wish to conclude that ANCA-associated vasculitis treatment outcomes are improving. Efforts are there towards tailored maintenance regimes. Rituximab is emerging as the agent of choice for remission maintenance, and we are moving towards lesser steroids, or maybe with Avocapan study, no steroids in the management of ANCA vasculitis. And so C5a inhibitors hold the promise of steroid-free regime. Thank you very much for a patient hearing. For those of you who want to dig deep, this is a 46 chapter book that I edited. And thank you very much for your patient hearing, and I'll be happy to answer any questions.